In the year 2145, humanity had long since spread beyond Earth. Starships now traveled through the vast expanse of space, exploring new planets, forging alliances, and discovering countless civilizations. Yet, amidst the busy trade routes and the shining cities of advanced worlds, there was a planet forgotten by time, a planet that no one visited. It was a small, barely noticeable speck in a distant star system, far from any major space lanes. The planet's name was Elira, once home to the Illyrians, a race of intelligent beings who had flourished for thousands of years. But now, the Illyrians were all but gone. The planet's surface was marked by ruins, crumbling cities, and abandoned structures that whispered stories of a once thriving civilization. An ancient virus had swept through the Illyrian population, wiping out almost all of them. The few survivors were scattered, struggling to hold on to their past in the face of such a devastating loss. But the greatest blow had come when other civilizations, afraid of the unknown, had abandoned them. The virus that devastated the Illyrians' bodies had also erased their once great knowledge, and no one came to help. Across the stars, other races and empires had turned their backs on Elira. In the cold vacuum of space, no one cared for the Illyrians anymore. That is, until one fateful mission. Captain Elira Collins stood at the helm of the Pioneer, a human exploration ship tasked with mapping out uncharted regions of space. She was a seasoned officer, having served in the Galactic Exploration Fleet for over a decade. Elira had seen many strange and wondrous things in her travels, but when her ship's sensors detected an unusual energy signal coming from the direction of Elira, her curiosity was piqued. There was something on that planet, something alive, something important. The crew of the Pioneer had not planned to land on Elira. It was a dead world, considered useless by many, but the signal they had detected was unlike anything they had encountered before. It was faint, almost as if it had been hidden from the rest of the universe for centuries. And as much as they wanted to move on, Elira couldn't shake the feeling that they were meant to investigate. "Captain, the signal's origin is pinpointed to a location just outside the ruins," Lieutenant Andrew Rice said, his voice filled with concern. "It's coming from deep within the old city. Should we prepare for landing?" Elira thought for a moment, gazing out into the emptiness of space. It was risky, yes, but it was also a mystery, one that might just change everything. She nodded firmly. "Yes, Lieutenant. Prepare for landing. We need to see what's down there." As the Pioneer descended toward the surface, the once beautiful planet revealed its scars. The city below was a ghost of its former self. Towering spires lay shattered, roads were cracked, and trees had long since withered. Yet there was something about it that called to them, something that told them that not all was lost. The landing was smooth, but the air felt heavy, as if it had not been breathed in years. The crew, in full protective gear, made their way out of the ship and into the ruins. The silence was unnerving. Every step they took echoed through the empty streets, their boots crunching against the dust and debris that covered the ground. "Stay alert, everyone," Elira said, her voice steady. "We don't know what we might find here." As they ventured deeper into the city, they came across something unexpected. A structure that appeared to be a library, or what was left of it, stood taller than the others. Its stone walls, though weathered, still held an ancient dignity. Elira felt a strange pull toward it. She didn't know why, but it felt important. Inside, the air was cool and still. The remnants of what might have been great knowledge were scattered across the floor. Broken terminals, chart books, and pieces of alien technology. But one thing caught Elira's eye, a small glowing sphere, pulsing faintly in the center of the room. She knelt down beside it and carefully reached out to touch it. As her fingers brushed against the smooth surface, the sphere lit up, and a hologram flickered to life. The image was unclear at first, but slowly it began to sharpen, revealing the face of an Illyrian. Their skin was a soft shade of blue, their eyes large and expressive, and their expression, though faint, conveyed a deep sadness. "I am Kale," the figure spoke, his voice soft yet filled with an undeniable strength. "If you are seeing this, it means that we have been forgotten." The message cut off abruptly, but it was enough. Ilara's heart sank as she realized that the Illyrians were not completely gone. There were still survivors, somewhere on this planet, in the shadows of their crumbling civilization. She stood up and turned to her crew, a new sense of purpose filling her heart. "We're not leaving yet," she said. "The Illyrians are still here, and it's time someone finally helped them." The pioneer would stay on Illyra, and humanity would protect the Illyrians, no matter the cost. They would not be forgotten. The next few days on Illyra were filled with discovery. Captain Ilara Collins and her crew had no idea what to expect. They had found evidence of Illyrians still alive, but where were they? How many were left? And why had no one come to their aid in all these years? After locating the glowing sphere in the library, the crew scoured the ruins for more clues. Their efforts led them deeper into the planet's forgotten corners, and soon they stumbled upon something unexpected, a small, hidden underground structure. It had been cleverly concealed beneath layers of rock and dirt, almost as if it was deliberately kept out of sight. The entrance was narrow, but large enough for the crew to squeeze through. As they entered, they were greeted by an eerie quiet. The walls were covered in strange markings, symbols that the crew couldn't understand. The air was thick with dust, but there was a faint warmth to it, something alive. "I think we found something," said Lieutenant Andrew Rice, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. He scanned the surroundings with his flashlight, revealing a series of ancient doors, most of which had collapsed, leaving only remnants behind. But there was one door still intact, made of a material that shimmered faintly under the light. Ilara approached the door slowly, her heart beating faster with each step. The closer she got, the stronger the pull she felt. It was as though the planet itself was urging her to open it. With a steady hand, she placed her palm on the surface, and the door hummed to life. It slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a large chamber beyond. Inside, the air was warmer, and the atmosphere felt different. It wasn't the cold, desolate silence they had grown used to. There was something here, something that had survived. The crew stepped cautiously inside, their eyes adjusting to the dim light. In the center of the room, a single Illyrian sat, her back to them. She was hunched over a console, her movements slow and deliberate. She had a soft, bluish hue to her skin, her head slightly tilted as though listening to something they couldn't hear. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. This was one of the Illyrians, alive. The crew stood in stunned silence. The Illyrian didn't seem to notice them at first, lost in whatever task she was performing. But as Ilara stepped forward, the alien turned her head, revealing her eyes, large, gentle, and filled with sorrow. "You've come," the Illyrian whispered, her voice barely audible but full of emotion. "You are the first in so long." Ilara knelt down, her heart heavy with the weight of what they were witnessing. "We're here to help," she said gently. "My name is Captain Ilara Collins. We're from Earth. We want to protect you." The Illyrian's eyes widened, and she slowly stood up, her movements graceful but shaky, as if her body hadn't fully recovered from years of solitude. She studied Ilara and the crew for a long moment, as if unsure whether to trust them. "I am Kaya," she said finally, her voice still soft, but now with a hint of hope. "I thought my people were all gone. The others, they couldn't survive the virus. And the galaxy, they abandoned us." "We found your message," Ilara replied, standing and offering Kaya a warm smile. "We're here because we know your people deserve to live. We won't let you be forgotten." Kaya hesitated, glancing at the crew behind Ilara. "You are different," she said quietly. "Others have come, but only to take from us. They wanted our knowledge, our technology, and they never cared for us. I fear you may want the same." Ilara's heart sank. The truth of Kaya's words stung, but they were also a reminder of why they were there. Humanity had the chance to do something different. They had the chance to be the ones who did not exploit the weak, but instead stood beside them. "No," Ilara said firmly. "We're not here to take anything. We're here to help you rebuild. You don't have to hide anymore. The rest of the galaxy, they may have turned their backs on you, but we won't." Kaya studied Ilara for a long time, and then slowly she nodded. Perhaps it is time to believe again. Over the next few days, the crew and Kaya worked together to learn more about the Illyrians' history and the technology that had once made them a powerful and peaceful race. Kaya spoke of the Illyrians' peaceful way of life before the virus, of their thriving cities, and their dedication to harmony with nature. They had been a race of healers, scientists, and philosophers, never seeking to conquer or harm others. But now, all of that was lost. The virus had wiped out most of their population, and the remaining few had retreated to hidden places, unsure of how to move forward. "We are not the same as we once were," Kaya said one evening, her voice filled with quiet sadness. "But perhaps with your help, we can find our way again." Ilara felt a deep sense of determination settle in her chest. "We'll help you rebuild, Kaya. Together, we can make sure the Illyrians are never forgotten." And so a bond began to form, not just between the humans and the Illyrians, but between two races who had once been strangers to each other. As they worked side by side, they learned to trust, to share knowledge, and to believe in a future that once seemed impossible. The stars were wide and filled with endless possibilities, and for the first time in a long while, both species dared to dream of a future where they could stand together. The days that followed were filled with hope, but also uncertainty. As Captain Ilara Collins and her crew worked alongside the Illyrians, they began to uncover more about the ancient civilization that had once thrived on Illyra. Kaya, the Illyrian survivor, shared stories of her people's glory and the peaceful advancements they had made. But she also spoke of the betrayal that had shattered her race's future. The Illyrians had once been a powerful and respected species. They had contributed greatly to the galactic community, offering knowledge on medicine, agriculture, and energy. They had built peaceful alliances with many races across the galaxy, helping those in need and creating a network of trust and cooperation. But that all changed when the virus struck. The other civilizations, fearful of the unknown, saw the Illyrians as a threat. "The virus that plagued us made our knowledge difficult to access," Kaya explained one evening as they sat in the underground chamber, surrounded by the flickering light of ancient Illyrian technology. "But it was the fear of what we had learned that truly led to our downfall. We were betrayed, abandoned by those we had once trusted." Ilara listened carefully, her heart aching for the Illyrians. She had known that the galaxy's politics could be cold and unforgiving, but hearing it firsthand from Kaya made it even harder to comprehend. "The Solari Syndicate," Kaya continued, her voice trembling. "They were one of the first to turn their backs on us. When the virus spread, they saw our technology as a threat. They feared what we could become if we recovered, and so they chose to erase us from the galaxy. They spread lies about us, told everyone that we were a danger, that our technology could never be trusted." Ilara frowned, her mind racing. The Solari Syndicate was a powerful organization made up of the wealthiest and most influential corporations in the galaxy. If they were involved, things were far worse than they had imagined. The Syndicate controlled trade, resources, and the flow of information. If they had indeed played a part in erasing the Illyrians from history, it meant that there was a much deeper conspiracy at play. "We can't let this continue," Ilara said firmly, her voice full of resolve. "If the Syndicate is responsible for this, then it's time to expose them. They can't be allowed to get away with erasing an entire race from the galaxy." Kaya nodded slowly, her eyes dark with pain, but also a glimmer of hope. "You don't understand," she said. "The Syndicate is everywhere. They have spies. They control the markets, the media, everything. They will stop at nothing to make sure that the Illyrians are forgotten forever. You can't fight them alone. Ilara's crew exchanged looks, realizing the weight of the challenge ahead. The Syndicate wasn't just a group of corporations. It was a power that extended its influence into nearly every part of the galaxy. Fighting them would be no small task. But Ilara was undeterred. "We don't have to fight them alone," she said, her voice filled with determination. "We'll find others. There are smaller planets, races that have been crushed under the Syndicate's heel. If we can unite them, we can stand together." Kaya's eyes filled with gratitude, but there was still fear in them. "And what will you do once you've gathered them? The Syndicate has a fleet, an army. You cannot defeat them with only a few ships." Ilara smiled, a spark of hope in her eyes. "Maybe not with a few ships, but we have something they don't. We have the truth. The galaxy has forgotten you, Kaya. But I won't, and I won't let anyone else forget you, either." The conversation lingered in the air, and as the days passed, the crew of the Pioneer worked tirelessly to gather information. They scoured the ruins of Illyra, uncovering hidden archives and ancient systems, all while Kaya continued to share the history of her people. Slowly, they pieced together a plan, one that would take them far beyond the desolate world of Illyra. But just as Ilara began to believe they might stand a chance, a message came in, one that would change everything. It was a broadcast, transmitted across the galaxy. The signal was faint but unmistakable. It came from the heart of the Solari Syndicate's territory. The message was clear, though the words were chilling. "We have found the Illyrians. They will not be allowed to rise again. Do not interfere." The message was brief, but its meaning was unmistakable. The Syndicate knew they were alive, and they would stop at nothing to ensure that the Illyrians remained forgotten. The threat was real, and it was clear that the Syndicate was already moving to eliminate any hope of their revival. Ilara clenched her fists, her mind racing. "They found us," she said, her voice low but full of fury. "The Syndicate knows we're here, and they won't let us leave without a fight." Kaya's face was pale, but her eyes burned with determination. "They cannot erase us. Not again. We will not go quietly." Ilara turned to her crew, her heart steeled with resolve. "Prepare the Pioneer. We're going to take the fight to them. We won't just stand by and let them destroy us. We'll fight for the truth, for the Illyrians, and for the future." And so the battle for the Illyrians' survival began. The Syndicate had made its move, but Captain Ilara Collins and the crew of the Pioneer were not about to let their world be erased once again. The fight for justice had just begun, and they would do everything in their power to ensure that the truth would not be silenced. The Pioneer hummed with life as the crew scrambled to prepare for the journey ahead. Captain Ilara Collins stood on the bridge, her eyes fixed on the star-filled horizon. The broadcast from the Solari Syndicate had shaken them all, but it had also sparked a fire inside her. They couldn't back down now, not after everything they had learned about the Illyrians and their tragic history. If they were going to fight the Syndicate, they needed allies, and they needed to move quickly. "Captain, the coordinates are set," Lieutenant Andrew Rice reported, his voice steady as he focused on the navigation controls. "We're ready to leave at your command." Ilara nodded, her gaze shifting to Kaya, who stood silently near the communication station. The Illyrian had been through so much, and yet, despite her grief and the weight of her people's loss, there was a new light in her eyes, a light that hadn't been there before. She was ready to fight too. "All right," Ilara said, her voice firm. "Set course for the nearest outpost in the Silurian system. We need to make contact with anyone who might help us." As the Pioneer leaped into faster-than-light travel, the crew worked tirelessly, compiling data from Illyra's archives, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. The Syndicate would not go down easily, but they would not stop the Pioneer either. They were prepared to fight for the truth. Over the course of the next few weeks, the crew made contact with various smaller planets and civilizations that had been oppressed by the Syndicate. Some of them were hesitant, fearful of attracting the Syndicate's wrath. But others, especially those who had lost everything to the Syndicate's greed and control, eagerly offered their support. Word spread quickly through the galaxy. The Illyrians had not been erased. They were alive, and there were those who were willing to stand with them. On one such planet, a small mining colony called Trellon, the crew met with a group of brave rebels who had been fighting the Syndicate's corrupt rule for years. Their leader, a seasoned warrior named Jarek, was quick to lend his assistance. "You're fighting the Syndicate?" Jarek asked, his voice rough but full of conviction. "Then you've got my support. We've been waiting for someone to take a stand. You found something they don't want out there. Something that could shake their control over the galaxy." Ilara stood firm, meeting Jarek's gaze. "We're not just fighting for the Illyrians. We're fighting for everyone the Syndicate has oppressed, and we're not going to stop until they are held accountable." Jarek smiled, his eyes filled with respect. "Then we'll stand with you. It's about time someone made a stand. We'll help you gather more allies. Together, we can make the Syndicate regret ever thinking they could erase the Illyrians." With Jarek's help, they were able to connect with more groups who had suffered under the Syndicate's rule. Rebels, farmers, traders, and even former Syndicate employees who had grown disillusioned with their masters all came forward, ready to fight for the freedom of the Illyrians and everyone the Syndicate had crushed. As the fleet grew, so did the plans. Ilara and her crew worked around the clock, strategizing the best way to confront the Syndicate. Kaya, though still learning to trust others after her people's history of betrayal, found herself becoming a strong voice in their efforts. She shared her knowledge of the Illyrians' technology, which could be a vital asset in the upcoming battle. The Illyrians had once been pioneers in peaceful energy sources and medical advancements, and their forgotten technology could give them the edge they needed. "We must be careful," Kaya warned during one of their strategy meetings. "The Syndicate knows that if the truth gets out, they'll lose everything. They will stop at nothing to destroy us. We have to be smart. We can't let them know we're coming until we're ready." Ilara agreed. The Syndicate's spies were everywhere, and the more they revealed their plans, the more danger they would be in. But with the support of their new allies, they had something the Syndicate couldn't predict: unity. The Illyrians, the miners, the rebels, and even the traders, they were all in this together. Days turned into weeks, and soon they had gathered enough strength to confront the Syndicate. But just as they began to prepare for the final phase of their mission, an unexpected message came through. The transmission was clear, but the words were chilling. "We know what you're planning," the voice on the other end said, distorted but unmistakably threatening. "You think you can fight us. You think you can stand against the Syndicate's power. You will regret this decision. We will make sure the Illyrians are forgotten forever, and you will be the ones responsible for it." The message ended abruptly, leaving Ilara and her crew in stunned silence. They had hoped that the Syndicate would underestimate them, but it was clear that the Syndicate had already set its sights on them. The time for secrets was over. The fight was coming, and there was no turning back now. "Prepare for battle," Ilara said, her voice strong despite the fear that gnawed at her. "We are going to show them that the Illyrians will never be erased again, and we will fight until the galaxy knows the truth." The crew of the Pioneer rallied around her, ready for whatever the Syndicate would throw at them. They had come too far to fail now. With their allies by their side, and the Illyrians' future on the line, there was no room for doubt. The storm was coming, and they were ready to face it head-on. The stars outside the Pioneer gleamed like distant memories as Ilara Collins stood on the bridge, staring out into the vastness of space. The final battle was approaching, and she could feel the weight of it pressing on her shoulders. With the Syndicate's threats now looming large, there was no more room for hesitation. Their plan was in motion, but everything depended on their next moves. The galaxy had to know the truth about the Illyrians. They couldn't afford to lose this chance. "Captain," Lieutenant Andrew Rice's voice interrupted her thoughts. "We've received word from the other systems. The fleet is ready. Ilara turned to face him. She could see the determination in his eyes. The crew was ready, and they had gathered a strong force. It was time to make their stand. Thank you, Reyes. Let's begin the final phase. The Pioneer had become the heart of their growing resistance, a symbol of unity for all those who had suffered under the Syndicate's grip. The crew, once strangers to each other, had formed a bond through shared purpose. They had reached out to countless other groups, rebels, traders, miners, and even some scientists who had once worked for the Syndicate, now disillusioned with the organization's ruthless methods. Every ship that had joined their cause brought something important to the table: resources, knowledge, and a burning desire to see the Syndicate fall. In one of the ship's command rooms, Kaya stood, speaking quietly with Ilara. The Illyrian had become an essential part of the crew, not just as a guide to her people's history and technology, but as someone who had lived through the darkness of betrayal and loss. She had learned to trust Ilara and the others, and together they had devised a plan to confront the Syndicate. "We need to hit them at their core," Kaya said, her voice steady, though the weight of her past still lingered in her eyes. "If we attack their primary communication hubs, we can expose the truth to the entire galaxy. It will disrupt their control, show that the Illyrians are not gone, and that we won't be silenced." Ilara nodded, her mind working through the plan. "And once we break their communications, we'll make sure everyone knows who the Syndicate really is, the truth about their lies and betrayal." "But we must be careful," Kaya warned. "They will try to stop us before we can make our move. They'll use everything at their disposal to maintain control." Ilara turned to the crew, who were gathered around the table in the strategy room. "We've prepared for this. The Syndicate thinks we're just a handful of ships, that we're easy to defeat. But we're more than that. We've united people who've been crushed by their greed. We're fighting for freedom. And freedom is a powerful thing." The crew exchanged determined looks. They had all seen the atrocities the Syndicate had committed, how they had destroyed entire worlds, erased cultures, and manipulated governments for profit. No longer would they allow it to continue. Jarek, the leader of the rebel forces, stepped forward. "We've gathered a small fleet. Our ships are fast, nimble, and ready for action. The Syndicate's fleet is vast, but their focus is spread thin. We can make this work." Ilara smiled, feeling the weight of their shared mission. "Then let's do it. For the Illyrians. For everyone who has suffered under the Syndicate's thumb." The next few hours were a whirlwind of final preparations. The Pioneer and its allies moved into position, the fleet a mix of old and new ships, all determined to make a stand. Ilara stood on the bridge, watching the fleet form up in the distance. This was it, the moment they had all been waiting for. The stars beyond looked serene, but beneath that calm exterior, the storm was about to break. As the fleet made its way toward the Syndicate's territory, Kaya worked with the crew to access the Syndicate's encrypted networks. She had once been a part of the Illyrians' technological advances, and her knowledge of their systems gave them an edge. The Syndicate's communications were heavily protected, but with Kaya's help, they found a way in. They would release the truth about the Illyrians to the galaxy, showing everyone who had been involved in the cover-up. On the eve of their attack, Ilara sat in her quarters, reflecting on everything that had brought them here. The battles, the struggles, the losses. But there was one thing that had always kept her going. Hope. Hope that the galaxy could be better. Hope that the Illyrians, once forgotten, could rise again. The calm before the storm was only temporary. Ilara knew that. Tomorrow, they would strike. The following morning, the Pioneer and the Allied fleet entered the heart of Syndicate-controlled space. The Syndicate's strongholds loomed large, massive stations designed to maintain their control over the galaxy. The Syndicate had no idea what was coming. "We're in position," Reyes called from the navigation console. "All ships are ready." Ilara took a deep breath. "Let's do this. We're not just fighting for the Illyrians. We're fighting for every world that has suffered at the hands of the Syndicate." Let's remind them that no one can be erased. No one. The order was given, and the fleet advanced, cloaked and ready to strike. As they neared the Syndicate's main communication hub, they found the heart of the Syndicate's power. A massive orbital station that controlled all incoming and outgoing transmissions. Ilara's voice echoed through the comms. "This is it. We take down the station, and we take down their control." The battle began, and the fleet moved in swiftly, using surprise as their greatest weapon. The Syndicate was unprepared, their defenses struggling to react as the Pioneer and its allies launched a coordinated strike. With each passing moment, the hope of a free galaxy grew stronger. Ilara knew they were not just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for a future where no race, no culture, would ever again be erased by greed and fear. The battle was far from over, but Ilara Collins felt the pulse of hope as the Pioneer and its fleet pressed deeper into Syndicate-controlled space. The first wave of their assault had been successful, catching the Syndicate off guard. But there was more to be done. The communications hub was now in their hands, but the Syndicate was far from defeated. If they were to win this battle, they needed to expose the Syndicate's lies to the galaxy and dismantle the core of their operation. "We've done well, but this is just the beginning," Ilara said, her voice steady, though her heart raced with anticipation. "We have to hit them at their most vulnerable point, their central command. If we can break their leadership, we can break their hold over the galaxy." The crew nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. They had gathered a force, but it was still small compared to the Syndicate's overwhelming strength. The Syndicate had been a shadow over the galaxy for too long. If they didn't act now, the truth might never get out, and the Illyrians could be lost forever. On the bridge, Lieutenant Andrew Reyes began plotting the next phase of their mission. "We've decrypted their primary channels," he said, his fingers flying over the console. "I've located their central command station. Well protected, but it's a target we can't afford to miss." Kaya stepped forward, her presence strong but cautious. "Their command station is heavily guarded. I used to work with their systems. There are traps built into their defenses that we need to avoid. If we rush in without a plan, they will lock us out before we can reach the core." Ilara turned to Kaya, trusting her instincts. "What do you suggest?" "We need to be patient," Kaya replied. "We can't just force our way through. Instead, we need to outsmart them. I'll use my knowledge to create a backdoor into their system. Once we're inside, we can release the data and expose everything. The truth about the Illyrians, the lies, and the Syndicate's betrayal. That will cripple them." Ilara took a deep breath, the weight of Kaya's words settling in. It wasn't just a battle of ships and weapons anymore. This was a war of information. With the Syndicate's secrets out in the open, their power would crumble. But getting to that point wouldn't be easy. "All right," Ilara said, her voice firm. "We'll move in quietly. We'll get into their command station without raising alarms. Once Kaya has access to their systems, we'll drop the truth like a hammer." The crew went to work, preparing for the next phase of their mission. The fleet was ready, each ship positioned and waiting for the signal. Jarek and his rebels would lead the charge, distracting the Syndicate's forces, while Ilara's team infiltrated the central command station. As the ships moved into position, Ilara couldn't shake the feeling that the moment of truth was drawing near. The Syndicate had built its empire on lies, and now it was time to show the galaxy the face behind the mask. "We're ready," Kaya said, her voice calm despite the immense challenge ahead. "I've found a way in. We just need a few more minutes." Ilara gave a nod of approval. "We'll be ready." With their course set, they approached the Syndicate's command station, a massive fortress-like structure that loomed in space, its exterior gleaming with cold, metallic precision. The station was surrounded by defensive satellites and ships, but the Pioneer and its allies moved with a quiet grace, using the cover of the nearby asteroid field to approach undetected. Jarek's fleet engaged the Syndicate's forces in a daring strike, drawing their attention away from the Pioneer and its mission. The battle raged in the distance, a distraction that allowed Ilara and her crew to slip past the outer defenses. Inside the station, Kaya worked swiftly at her terminal, her fingers flying over the keys. "I'm in," she said, her voice tight with focus. "Now we need to expose the truth." The minutes stretched like hours as Ilara and her team waited for Kaya to complete the upload. Every moment felt like a countdown to something monumental. The Syndicate's control over the galaxy rested on the secrecy of their actions, and once the truth was out, everything could change. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the station. "They know we're here," Rais shouted. "We've been compromised." Ilara's heart raced. There was no time left. "Kaya, now." Without hesitation, Kaya hit the final command, and the screens around them flickered to life. A galaxy-wide broadcast began, filling every communication channel with a single, undeniable message. The Illyrians were not extinct. They were betrayed, erased, and hidden by the Syndicate. And they were coming back. The truth was out. The Syndicate's core had been breached. Their lies were now exposed for all to see. But they would not give up without a fight. The station's defenses powered up, and the alarms grew louder as the countdown to their destruction began. "We need to get out of here now," Ilara ordered. "Kaya, can you shut down their self-destruct systems?" "I'll try," Kaya replied, already moving to override the countdown. But as the seconds ticked away, Ilara knew they couldn't afford to wait. "All hands, retreat to the ships." The crew scrambled to evacuate, but as they made their way to the docking bays, explosions rang out, sending shockwaves through the station. The Syndicate wasn't going to let them escape easily. Jarek's fleet had held the Syndicate at bay for as long as possible, but now it was time for the Pioneer and its crew to make their escape. The truth had been broadcasted. The Syndicate would never be the same. Ilara's heart pounded as the countdown continued, but she was resolute. The battle was far from over, but the first blow had been struck. They had exposed the Syndicate's lies to the galaxy, and no matter what happened next, there was no turning back. The fight for the Illyrians, for justice, had only just begun. The Pioneer and its fleet were scattered across space, each ship racing to safety after the explosion that rocked the Syndicate's command station. The truth was out, and the galaxy would never be the same. Ilara Collins stood at the bridge, her mind racing as she watched the stars. The battle wasn't over, but the first step had been taken. They had exposed the Syndicate's lies, and now the galaxy knew the truth. There was no turning back. "Captain, we're receiving messages from across the galaxy," Lieutenant Andrew Rais said, his voice filled with urgency. "The Syndicate's control is slipping. Several systems have already begun to break away. We've got people reaching out, asking for help. The truth is spreading faster than we anticipated." Ilara felt a surge of hope as the words sank in. Their mission had been more than just a fight against the Syndicate. It had been a fight for the freedom of countless civilizations, for the chance to right the wrongs of the past. The Syndicate had been a force of control and secrecy for so long, but now they were on the edge of losing everything. "We need to act fast," Ilara said, her voice steady but filled with determination. "The Syndicate will fight back. They won't let their empire fall without a struggle. We need to rally our allies, keep pushing forward." Kaya stood nearby, her face etched with exhaustion, but also a quiet strength. "The truth is powerful, Captain. The Syndicate may fight, but they're already losing their grip. The galaxy is waking up to what's been hidden from them for so long." The message from the Pioneer had gone viral across the galaxy. Millions, if not billions, of people had seen the broadcast revealing the Illyrians' tragic fate and the Syndicate's betrayal. Across countless worlds, governments were beginning to change. People were demanding answers, questioning everything they had been told about their history and the universe. For the first time in centuries, the Syndicate's stranglehold on the galaxy was beginning to slip. "Reyes," Ilara said, her voice calm but full of resolve, "prepare a message. We need to make sure our allies know that we're not stopping here. The galaxy must come together if we want to ensure that the truth prevails." Reyes nodded. "Already on it, Captain." As the Pioneer and its fleet moved through the vast expanse of space, the crew worked tirelessly to contact every planet, every rebel faction, and every group that had suffered under the Syndicate's rule. There were many, and with each message, they grew stronger. But with each victory, the Syndicate was also regrouping, looking for ways to fight back. "Captain, we're detecting an incoming Syndicate fleet," Lieutenant Reyes reported. "It's large, too large for us to handle on our own." Ilara's eyes narrowed as she looked at the approaching fleet. The Syndicate was desperate now. They had no choice but to fight back with everything they had left. But Ilara knew that the truth was on their side. The galaxy had already started to rise up, and they couldn't be stopped now. "It's time," Ilara said, standing tall. "We fight, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who has suffered under the Syndicate's rule. We fight for the Illyrians. We fight for the future." Kaya's voice was quiet but resolute. "The Syndicate may have the power, but we have something far stronger. The will to free the galaxy. They can't erase what's already been seen." As the Pioneer and its fleet prepared for battle, the galaxy watched, waiting to see what would happen next. The final confrontation was at hand. But this time, the Syndicate was no longer the only force in the galaxy. There were new allies, new voices, all united by a common goal: freedom. The battle was fierce, the Syndicate's ships moving in with precision, determined to crush the growing rebellion before it could take root. But Ilara and her crew fought back with everything they had. Jarek's rebels engaged the enemy head-on, distracting the Syndicate's forces while the Pioneer and its fleet worked to disable the enemy's communications and weapon systems. Kaya worked quickly, her knowledge of the Syndicate's technology giving them an edge. "I found a weakness in their command center," she said, her voice calm despite the chaos around her. "We can disable their fleet's coordination if we target the station." Ilara nodded, knowing they had little time. "Reyes, set a course for that station. We take it out, and the rest of the fleet will fall apart." The Pioneer moved swiftly through the battle, dodging fire and engaging enemy ships in precision strikes. The Syndicate's fleet, once a symbol of overwhelming power, was beginning to fracture under the pressure. Ilara's heart raced as they neared the station, their last obstacle standing between them and victory. With a final, coordinated strike, the Pioneer launched its assault, taking out the Syndicate's central command center. The remaining enemy ships faltered, their lines broken, and their forces scattered. The Syndicate's grip on the galaxy had finally broken. As the dust settled and the last of the Syndicate's ships retreated, Ilara looked out into the vastness of space. The battle was won, but there was still much work to do. The galaxy had been shaken, but the truth had been revealed. The Illyrians were not gone. They were alive, and their future was now in their own hands. Ilara knew that this was only the beginning. The Syndicate's fall was just the first step toward a new era for the galaxy, one where the voices of the oppressed would no longer be silenced, one where the truth could never again be buried. "Today, we've made history," Ilara said, her voice filled with hope. "Tomorrow, we rebuild." And as the crew of the Pioneer celebrated their hard-fought victory, they knew the fight for a better future had just begun. The galaxy was awake, and nothing would ever be the same again.